two things for today. First of all, we have, as I said, as I already wrote, we have fifth Sunday of the Pentecost or after Pentecost, and the readings that we will have today in the liturgy is Book of Leviticus, two passages actually. One is chapter 18, verses 1 through 5, and 19, 9 through 18. Okay? 2 words about Book of Leviticus. Just for fun, how many of you have read Book of Leviticus from the very beginning to the very end? Okay. Don't worry about that. That's one of the least read books in the church for some reason. Though it is very, very important book. In our readings in the lectionary of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, I counted 4 times in 3-year cycle when we read passages from Leviticus. 3 out of 4 somehow are related to the same passage from chapter 19. Okay? So, and we have about up to almost 20 from book of Isaiah, for example. My question is, how do you understand Isaiah if you don't really understand the sacrificial system of these guys? So, it's just a question, it's just a question. But seriously, just an example why it is important. The gospel reading for today will be the great, well-known story, the parable or story of a great Samaritan. Okay? You remember that. The guy was going from Jerusalem to Jericho. He was beat up by robbers. He ended up on that road. And the priest passed by. And everybody's, oh, such a bad guy. The problem is, he was perfect according to the rules. Because in Leviticus, in chapter 21, in verse 11, we have a prohibition for a priest to touch dead body. It had to be someone else who would determine, is this guy dead or not? Okay? So since he couldn't do that, he just passed by. I don't want to justify the priest, because the parable is not about that. The true question for a parable actually is not who is my neighbor, but to whom I am a neighbor. Okay? And that's important. Okay? Again, one more thing that determines the proper understanding of parable of the Good Samaritan. Our reading here. We will come to that, but let's jump right now there. Okay? 19:17. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance, nor bear grudge against him of the people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, we will hear it in today's gospel reading. This is Leviticus. Okay? So to understand what Jesus and this it says lawyer, and we immediately think of those guys who have, law degrees, and we have some of them here. But, so what they are talking about, we need to read Leviticus. That's just 5 minutes of encouragement. Read Leviticus. And if you don't get it, okay, either read the commentary or ask somebody who gets it. Okay? But, as a book as a whole, because for us it is a relatively strange book, because we do not have a temple, we do not do sacrifices, we not only don't do sacrifices, we usually get meat already packed in loaves from, I don't know, where you get them from Smart and Final, from Vaughn's. I don't have any royalties from those stores to mention them, but wherever store you go to, okay, in a sense, good old days, those guys would do it by themselves. So it would, in some sense, it would make more sense. That's why it is a little bit stranger to us. But it is still important. So to make some kind of sense out of the book as a whole, oh my goodness, now I'm puzzled. The friend of mine sent me a gift. Lots of markers.
Too many selections?
Yes, see, now I have another problem. Before that I just had one color and everything was fine. Now, so the book as a whole, not necessarily the structure that I will present to you is not divine. It just helps me to kind of remember where everything is. So 7 parts. A, chapters 1 through 7, where we have sacrifices. Okay? Part B, chapters 8 through 9, 8 through 10, where we have priests. Or, in some sense, holy people. C, 11 through 15, that's where the question of clean, unclean. Okay? In the Bible, we need to be very careful and see the difference. There is a difference between clean and unclean, and then holy and profane, and we'll see that. Okay? For example, if you eat unclean food, or what is known as non-kosher, it is not a sin. It does not make you sinful person. It just makes you unclean. It's a different story. We're not going to talk about that today. Maybe we'll talk about that sometime after, partially depending on what today will show us. Okay? So, D, the middle. Very important. Chapter 16. It's a day of atonement. Okay? That's where we have 2 goats, one is a scapegoat, and one is sacrificed. That's where we have sacrifice for priests separately, for whole people of Israel separately. That's the day that explains that the high priest, or the chief priest actually, should go once a year toward the Holy of Holies, and so on and so forth. Then, we have a C prime, so the block kind of thematically matching with 11:15. We have 17 to 22. This is where we talk about holy, profane. Okay? Jesus says, you have to be, it is in our translation, you have to be perfect as your Father is perfect. Okay? Actually, is you have to be holy as your Father or God is holy. This is based on this block. Most of those phrases, and we will see that. I am holy, therefore you should be holy. This is here. Okay? Then B prime, instead of talking about holy people, chapter 23 talks about holy days. Okay? That's where we have a calendar. The whole chapter is devoted to calendar. What feasts should be celebrated, how long, how they should be celebrated, and so on and so forth. And the last one, 24 to 27, deals with kind of sabbatical themes. It is sabbatical year, there is a year of Jubilee, and so on and so forth. Let's say themes. Okay? So, this is the book as a whole. Okay? Just for you to figure out. So, right now, we are here in this C prime block. Sometimes it is called, if you will find a scholarly commentary, it is called, this whole block is called Holiness Code. Okay? 2 things about that. Or actually 3 things about that. I knew I forgot something. Bummer. Okay. So, 3 things about that. I have to warn you, depending on the commentary that you will pick up. you might find a commentary that will talk about that there was no Moses, there was no conquest, and there was no 5 books of Moses because there was no Moses, as we know it. There are 4 different sources that somehow, long after Babylonian exile, were put together, and the sources are named as J, E, D, and P. Yahweh's, Elohim's, Deuteronomy, and Priestly Code. Okay, you do not need to memorize it, even though the next time we'll have a quiz, but just for fun. Okay, the reason is these people, for some reason, they don't believe it. So they believe that the Holiness Code is part of the priestly thing, and priestly writings were collected after exile. So it is not by time of Moses, it is actually about 6th or 5th century BC. Okay, much later in the history than we think. Okay, if you will see this GEDP stuff, just know what it is about. Don't worry about that. This is fresh, organic, hand-picked, right from the place delivered. Okay? No kidding. Sorry to say that, but that's what it is. Has no background really. Whatever. So just beware. But we do have a holiness code. Because, for example, in only chapter 19, part of which we will study, we have most of our 10 commandments picked up one more time. In a little bit different order, but it is. For example, let us go to verse 4 of chapter 19. Do not turn to idols or make yourselves any god of cast metal. I am the Lord your God. Okay. Commandment number 1. Okay. Commandment number 2, verse 12. You shall not swear by my name falsely and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Okay. 3 and 4, verse 3. Every one of you shall revere his mother and his father, and you shall keep my Sabbaths. Okay, right there. 5, verse 16. You shall not go around as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not stand up against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord. Okay? Chapter 6, verse 29. Do not profane your daughter by making her a prostitute. I mean, that's what ESV has. I don't know what NIV or RSV says, but pretty self-explanatory. 7 and 8, we will have verse 11. You shall not steal. I mean, pretty self-explanatory. And verse 15, for example. You shall not do injustice in court. You shall not be partial to poor or to defer to the great. Okay, so you need to have a right witness. And 9 and 10, verse 18. You shall not take vengeance and bear grudge against the sons of your own people. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, so it is in a sense a kind of like a, on one hand, compact and then a little bit more explained. We will see that. A little bit more explained covenant that we had at the very, very beginning at the Sinai when God started with 10 Commandments. It is actually very interesting to see how 10 Commandments are developed through time. Not in the sense that they are seriously changed, but some things in the beginning of their journey in the wilderness develop, and by the time when Moses delivers his last speech before they enter the land, some things make more, I would say, practical sense. For example, it's not in our reading, but in chapter 17, there is a rule that if you want to eat meat, Not even as a sacrifice. If you want to eat meat, you bring your animal to tabernacle. And by the entrance to tabernacle, which is the portable place of worship, okay? You bring it there, you bring it to the priest, you say a prayer, dedicate it, cut it, done. You can go home and cook it, that's fine. That's fine even though it was kind of like a big camp, but when you spread, let's say 200 miles up north and 200 miles down south, you cannot come to the temple with every meal, with every animal. The point is, by the time we get to Deuteronomy, Moses says, okay, that's fine. You do it, but still, you drain the blood of an animal on the ground. You don't do it at the worship place, but you still do not eat it with the blood. Okay? So, some things of that. Second thing, apart from this stuff that you need to be aware of and you need to be cautious about that. Second thing about holiness code. And we will see the term holy in Hebrew, it's not spelled that way, but it sounds like that. It's kadosh. Okay? Means being separate. Okay? Not necessarily this kind of high heaven divine with wings and with kind of golden thing around your head. Yeah, but most importantly, it is not like others. Okay? So when God says, I am holy, therefore you should be holy, what he is really saying is, I am not like other gods, therefore you should be not like other people. And we will have this. Our reading today is in 18. We'll start and we'll come to this point. You left Egypt, you're going to Canaan. Be careful, not be like those guys that you just left and not like those guys that you're going to. Don't carry any of this trash that you might pick up from there, and don't blend in with the other guys that you're going to. Okay? You are who you are. And your identity is the one that I give you. So you should be separate because I am separate. I'm not like the one like others. Third thing that I need to say before we'll start the lesson. Sometimes, the text. Yeah, we're kind of in the lesson. Yeah, I know, Mark. Yeah. Thanks for Mark. It's very lovely to have well-prepared congregation. So, seriously, sometimes we can hear that we are not under the law. Correct. In the sense that law, or 5 books of Moses, or whatever law parts in the scripture we have, is not the basis for relationship with our Lord. Okay? On the other hand, and that's what I forgot Book of Concord. In our Lutheran Confessions, in the last book in the Lutheran Confessions, which is the formula of Concord, we have article which is called Third Use of the Law, which states, as Paul writes, is law bad? Nope. It's still good. It is good that we can learn what God expects from us, how He wants us to behave. By no means 5 books of Moses will determine are we going to be children of God or not. No. We are part of His family because we have older brother who intercede for us. And we will have this reading from Colossians today. Because of Him, we have forgiveness of sins and redemption. But now, as the children of God, how should we behave? God already told us how to behave. Right here. Some things, because of Messiah, because of Christ, have changed. Okay? For example, we do not do sacrifices. But if you look carefully on how our liturgy is structured, especially communion liturgy, it follows the procedure of Leviticus chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3 together. Again, we are not going to talk about that today. I just want to mention it. Now we go to the text. Okay, so let me. Okay, today we will have 5 parts. First, let's start with chapter 18, verses 1 through 5. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God. You shall not do as they do in the land of Egypt, where you live. And you shall not do as they do in the land of Canaan, to which I am bringing you. You shall not walk in their statutes. I am the Lord your God. You shall therefore keep my statutes, my rules. If a person does them, he shall live by them. I am the Lord. Okay? So, again, we know okay, so they go from Egypt to Canaan, to the land of Canaan. Okay? Right now, they are in the wilderness. Okay? The thing is, not your past and not the place where you're going to should determine, as I said, should determine your identity. Your identity should be determined by who you are, and who you are is determined by what God do you worship. We actually touched on that when I explained, I hope kindly explained, Genesis 11, remember the Tower of Babel. Okay? The relationship between cult and the culture. Whatever cult you have, whatever worship system you have, whatever culture you will produce. Okay? One simple, for me, pretty simple example. In Soviet Union, where I grew up, we were taught that Lenin lived, Lenin lives, and Lenin will live. Okay? Seriously, that's kind of like a mantra that were repeated through the school days. Okay? Almost on daily basis. Okay? Yet at the same time, we knew that his body is in the mausoleum in the Red Square. It's still there. Poor guy. Did not get a normal burial. He is still there. Okay? So, if somebody is lived, lives, and will live, it's kind of like a deity thing. If you compare it with what we have, the phrases we have about Jesus in Revelation chapter 1, it's almost word by word. So, on one hand, you have a deity, but the body of this deity, you know, it's not a secret, it is placed in the mausoleum. Therefore, you worship dead body. No wonder that the concentration camps that Stalin produced for his country, for our country, were such a grave, and more than 20 or maybe 30, and some people think more than 40 million people were killed and tortured in those concentration and labor camps. Okay? So if you have a cult of dead body, no wonder you have a culture of dead people. Okay? Pretty obvious and simple reason. Here, don't do that. Don't do like these guys. Do not do like these guys. Do as I tell you, and I am the Lord. And this is not a best translation of this. It's kind of like when we see the Lord, and sometimes it is even though a smaller font but is capitalized, it is a substitution for unpronounceable name, okay? Kinda like that, Yahweh. Okay? The thing is, the most important part that you need to know is not how to pronounce name, but what it means. This word comes, it's kind of like a participle that comes from the verb to be or to live or to be alive. So it is the living one. Okay? So the one who is constantly alive, and therefore, if our identity comes from him, he gives life. So we should be the ones who defend, protect life and encourage people to live fully. You know, and Jesus says, I came to give you life and life in abundance. Okay? Don't be surprised. Why? Because he is incarnate, the Lord. He's incarnate Yahweh. Okay? He's the second person of the Trinity. So, relatively simple. So, his rules, his statutes, that's where we get our identity. Okay? Now, let's go to chapter 19, and we have first two verses in our reading. It's actually, they are kind of like properly grouped in two verses, so 4 blocks and 2 verses each. And how do we know that? Because every one of them ends with the phrase, I am the Lord your God. Or I'm the Lord. Sometimes either or. Okay? So, 9 and 10. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its age. Neither you shall gather the gleaning after your harvest. And you shall not strip your vineyard bare, neither shall you gather the fallen grapes of your ground. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the living one, your God. I am the Lord, your God. Okay? Pretty self-explanatory on one hand. Just a small remark. If you would have if you would enjoy the discussion of this law with Jewish neighbors or Jewish friends, ask them, what is the age? How much? Okay? Because, seriously, I mean, if you have a field of, what percentage is an age? If they are well versed in their tradition, they will tell you. It's 1/60th. Okay? It's either 1/60th of a whole harvest or the territory. It depends. Okay? So, just a small note from Talmud. But we know that those two verses actually the basis for a whole book in the Bible. Which one? Who knows? What? These two verses, do not reap the harvest in your land. When you reap the harvest in your land, you shall not reap the field right to its age, and do not pick up what's gleaning, and so on and so forth. It is a basis for at least one single whole book in the Bible. Which one?
Ruth.
Exactly. Okay? So simple. It's about book of Ruth. She was able, with her mother-in-law, she was able to come back to the land in the beginning of the harvest. Even though Naomi had her own land, but nobody saw it. I mean, there was nothing to pick up. So they depended on the mercy and graciousness of others. And that's the whole book is all about. Boaz in chapter 2 shows up and says a great phrase that we repeat every worship service. He says, the Lord be with you. Literally. When we go through liturgy, 95% of what it says in the liturgy is right from the Bible. It's not because some wise man came up with the nice words. It's phrase after phrase, word repeat, biblical statements. Okay? So he comes and tells to his harvest workers, the Lord be with you. And with you. Okay? So nice, godly guys. And then he sees Ruth and, he goes beyond the rule. Because the rule is, if something fall down, don't pick it up. What he tells to his workers, just drop even more. Just drop it, So, and we know that this story is actually depicts the time period of Israel, relatively hard one. It was right after a long, not a drought, but what is it? When we lost the harvest. Famine. Thank you. Sorry, I just forgot the word. Yes. So after a long famine, it was kind of like Israel started to build up, but he is so sure in the Lord, I would say, that Lord will provide enough for him and for his workers, and so he can give even more to the poor, or for Ruth, who is not a poor Israelite at this moment yet. She's a sojourner because she's a Moabite. Okay? So there is one more thing that I want to tell about this passage, and I guess we will have no time for other passages. But seriously, if we'll go to the book of Job, chapter 31, this is one of the last Job speeches where he tries to, his final appeal to the Lord. What he says, verses 17 to 20. Or let's start with 16. If I have withheld anything that to poor desires, or have caused the eye of the widow to fail, or have eaten my morsel alone, and the fatherless has not eaten of it. For from my youth the fatherless grew up with me as a father, and my mother's womb I got it the widow. And if I have seen anyone perish for the lack of clothing, or the need of without covering, if his body was not blessed, has not blessed by me or with me, and if he was not warmed with the fleece of my sheep, and if he raised a hand against the fatherless, because I saw my help in the gate. Okay, so this is one of the things in his final approach to God, trying to take a notice of me. What he points is not actually anything that differs from 5 books of Moses. I took care of the poor. I did all my best. Okay? So that's kind of important. And I believe we still have it. Most of us live either, people live either in big cities or in small towns. Not many people do harvesting. It's mostly one big company. I don't know how they do, but we have this principle in our society, even now, still built in. When the goods in the stores almost reach the day of expiration, not yet, but almost. What happens with that? They usually go to food bank, and then it's delivered to the poor and needy. That's right from here. It's right from here. It's pretty biblical. Okay? So, let us go a little bit faster. Chapter 19, verses 11 and 12. You shall not steal, you shall not deal falsely, you shall not lie to one another, you shall not swear by my name falsely, and so profane of the name of your God. I am the Lord. So, 4 things that profane the name. That's how the passage is actually structured. Do not do this, do not do this. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this will lest this will happen. So if you do one of these 4 things, you profane the name. So what is that? Stealing, dealing falsely, or actually not doing truthfully. Okay? You shall not lie to one another, and you shall not swear by my name falsely. Okay? So, next one, 13, 14. You shall not oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages of a hired worker shall not remain with you all night until the morning, and you shall not curse the deaf, or, okay, let's stay with that, or put a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall fear the Lord, fear your God. I am the Lord. Okay? Two things. One of them is, see how the parallel is. Robbing and withholding the wages. Hired workers, back then, and sometimes even now, it's those guys who live from, paycheck to paycheck. And sometimes if they're hired on daily basis, remember again, if we'll go back to the book of Ruth that we mentioned today, she brought what she was able to glean, and that's how she and Naomi were able to prepare some food and, eat something, and it carried them to the next day. Same thing with hired workers. If he doesn't bring the paycheck, in a sense, whatever they were given, this night, he would, on the way back home, nothing would be bought on the market. So the whole family would starve. So that's the parallel of robbing on one hand. It's not really robbing because you will give it to him, but later. Okay? So if you can pay immediately, you pay immediately. There is one more addition to this kind of behavior is two things. Cursing deaf person who cannot hear and putting stumbling block in front of the one who cannot see. Okay? Apparently, for some reason, they are sick and therefore easy target. That's why you don't do that, because the one who created them this way, for his own reasons, is overseeing them. So fear of the Lord, fear of God should guard your heart and not doing that. Because I am the Lord. I am the living one. And we were talking about that, okay? So I am the living one, so you need to protect life as it is, and instead of harming, help improving, okay? Help these people to feel safe and defended. Okay? 15 and 16. You shall not do injustice in court. You shall not be partial to poor or defer to the great. But in righteousness shall you judge your neighbor. You shall not go around as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not stand up against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord. Okay? Two things. In the English translation, as in most of the translations, it looks like verse 15, you shall not do injustice in court, and therefore court turns into place. Yes, but not necessarily. The word which we have here is, in Hebrew is mishpat, means judgment in general. It can mean court, but it means your judgments, whatever you say. Okay? So, do not do injustice, either if you are called as a witness or as a jury at the trial process, or even when you talk to one another, when you talk to other people, when you pass a judgment, you should be as correct as possible. Small side note, that's probably why the book of Proverbs many times say, just keep your mouth shut, because the more you speak, the more troubles you get into. Okay? So, I don't want to say that you need to always keep your mouth shut, but it's just an observation. Okay? So, with this, yet, interestingly, you should not be partial to the poor or to defer to the great. Let's jump into Exodus 23. Right after 10 Commandments, we have some exposition of 10 Commandments, some clarifications. So in chapter 23, 3, or let's say 2 and 3. You shall not fall in within the many of do evil, and you shall not bear witness in the lawsuit, siding with the many, and so pervert justice. Nor you shall be partial to a poor man in his lawsuit. And partial in the lawsuit here and in Leviticus 19 actually means that you will favor the poor. You will favor the poor just because he is poor. Not because his case is right, but just because he's poor and the other party is able to pay him compensation. So whatever the justice is, just let's help the poor. What Leviticus 19 says is, don't be partial neither to the poor nor defer to the great one. So not the status of applicants should determine the result of the case, but the law. The great concept of the law, which is above everybody, and everybody should be subject to it. I know it not always happens, but that's the ideal, okay? One more thing. As I said, 16. You shall not go around as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not stand against your life. Okay? So actually it's go around. It should be better translated. In English it almost has no difference, but you shall not walk around. The thing is, why it is a little bit different, the verb walk in Hebrew means lifestyle. It's not just walk. You walk and you talk about people something else. It means halach is as I said, it means a lifestyle. So your lifestyle should not be as the one who slanders the people, but that's the one should be like the one who protects the life, because, or actually the word that we have here for life is a blood. Okay, so in that sense, so because the reason is, again, I am the Lord, I am the living one. So reputation, the name reputation, and the life reputation, the life validity of life, based on the fact that we worship God who is the living one. Okay? Last two verses. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. Let me say. Why Book of Leviticus is so important. We often go to Book of Matthew in chapter 18 and see how we should relate to one another, how should we confront one another if in case somebody sins against us. The thing is, I personally believe that in Matthew, let me write it down, let me use something brighter. In Matthew 18, verses 15 to 18, you can go home and reread them. If brothers sin against you, you go and confront. If not, you bring witnesses, and so on and so forth. I personally believe that Jesus made those rules based on what we have here, Leviticus 19. Because it is encourages us, you shall reason frankly with your neighbor. Then there is an addition. Lest you incur sin because of him. Two things about that. How you can end up being sinful because of him. One thing is if you will not tell him and he will sin, according to what we see in book of Ezekiel, is partially yours. You could warn him and you didn't. Okay? On the other hand, the argument can become so hot that instead of reaching each other, instead of building bridges, you will end up with hate in your heart. So you should be wise enough. How far do you carry the conversation, lest you will end up in sin? And that's what we have in Ephesians chapter 4. Give me a second, I'll jump there and read you Ephesians 4, 26 Maybe some of you know it by heart. Okay, Ephesians 4:26 we have. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down in your anger. Okay? And this particular verse can be understood in two ways. One of them, I can confess, I had it sometimes. I mean, you're so angry that it's just black in your eye. I mean, it's just, there is no sun. Everything is black. There is another one. You need to go and try to talk to the person same day before sun goes down. Okay? Because if you keep it, and it builds up, and it percolates, and more, and then it boils. Then when you approach him, it's not a conversation. It's like a volcano. Okay. Sorry, it's your problem. You should have told before. Why you didn't tell me up front? You know, it's like... Okay, the last verse for today. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. We know it by heart. And the reason is, why should you love your neighbor? Because I am the living one. I am the one who provides life, who defends life, and encourages others to provide life and live. Okay? Stay blessed.